we know this kind of time-sensitive matter, so I had my team hard at work at it. So we have completed the feasibility study for the amendment to your TIF district. And as I'm sure you all remember, this was prompted by interest in possibly having a new housing development developed, and in order to fund that development, it was necessary to find the necessary financing mechanisms, and tax increment financing appeared to be one of those tools that would be available to you to utilize to fund any type of debt obligations that occurred from the installation of the infrastructure, the roadway, the water and sewer, and things that go along with a housing development type scenario. So the first step in order to do an amendment to your TIF district is to assess the feasibility of the parcels interested in being included in that area to make sure that legally and by the law you can add those areas to your district, and they include all the qualifying factors that are necessary. So this is that study. Basically, I'm going to go through it with you as quickly and slowly as I can, just to make sure that you understand what's going on and what happened. Basically, everything is looking good. You can amend the properties to add into your TIF district. If you look here, just on page number 2, I believe everybody should have a report in front of them. Basically, this is just an introduction, overview of the different ways that properties can be classified as a TIF district area. There are 2 different things that they need to be qualified as. It's either a conservation area or a blighted area.
Is there an extra? Yes.
And if I don't have enough of them, that's my apologies. So basically, a conservation area is more of your improved properties. Basically, the precursor to that is that the properties have to have structures in them which at least 50% are over the age of 35 years or more. That was present in the properties that we were looking at. There's basically 13 different characteristics that can be found that to qualify them as a conservation area. You have to have at least 3 of these conditions present. It's everything from dilapidation and deterioration all the way to things like IEPA issues and things like that. The second thing that you want to look for is if the conditions for blight exist. That is vacant or improved areas, and you need 2 or more of 6 factors, and those are listed on your sheet as well. And so we looked for all these factors to be present. And then finally, there is basically a catch-all that if this condition is present in any of the properties, this almost automatically qualifies you to be in a TIF district. And those are undermining, unused rail yards, chronic flooding, and basically like disposal sites for materials. So after looking at all these different factors and all the different types of properties that were investigated, basically we found that if you look, there's a summary on page 5 and page 6. We found that of the 15 of the 22 structures that we looked at had issues of deterioration, so that's 68%. So that qualified, and these were present in 9 of the 12 developed parcels. There also were inadequate utilities. Basically, you have aging and antiquated utility lines present. Obviously, I think everybody probably knows about that. A lot of the lines dated back to the 1930s and things like that. So obviously, you have continuing maintenance and improvement of those facilities. So that qualified. And also, there was a present stagnant and declining property values. So we looked at the property values over the past 5 years, and basically we compared the values of the parcels that are looking to be amended into the TIF district compared to the city as a whole, and we found that at least 3 out of the past 5 years, the value of the properties that are to be added to the district either were declining or weren't growing at the same rate as the rest of the city. So this basically means that this is an area of need where it's not matching the growth of the rest of the community. We also looked at the comparison of the consumer price index that the Department of Labor puts out. We also found that 4 out of the last 5 years, the area under investigation didn't match the CPI for the rest of the community, which basically means that it wasn't developing at the same rate. And this is a complicated formula. I'm not sure how you figure out. We just look at what the stats say, and we can just make a comparison. So we also found that, I probably should mention that there's obviously maps here on the page after page 2. The area that we studied is the areas highlighted in orange. It's obviously, this is our target area where the potential housing development is looking to go in. This is a vacant area. And then we also have several other areas here, just several parcels up and toward the north side of town, which were intended to be amended also. So this makes up all the properties. I believe it's 19 parcels total. Going back to where we were, there's another map that shows your existing land use. This is just kind of an informative map that shows basically how properties are being utilized within your TIF district, including the properties intended to be amended. It's everything from residential, agricultural, vacant, retail, industrial. This will give us a tool when if we do proceed with amending the TIF district, we will create another one of these maps, and we can even do future land use maps, which will be part of that process, which you can indicate how you intend to use properties in the future. Obviously, this vacant area here where a potential housing development might go was probably going to have future land use of residential. And if you do a comprehensive plan or do any type of rezoning of areas, the TIF plan, the amended TIF plan, basically can give you a basis for making any type of zoning amendments, because you will have it planned out for those purposes, so you can cite this plan for when you make zoning amendments to any properties. Following that, we also, this is, that was for developed properties. For the vacant properties, there was obsolete platting. Obviously, for the parcel where a potential housing development might go, you're gonna need to plat that out and subdivide all those properties into individual lots, so you qualify for obsolete platting there. Deterioration of structures and site improvements of neighboring areas, obviously that is gonna be present just from areas that neighbor those vacant properties. There's evidence of deterioration. And then the same thing with stagnant and declining property values. That was also present for the vacant properties. So even your properties that have no development aren't rising at the natural rates of the rest of the community, and that's to be expected. And as I mentioned, the area is actually undermined. There's a summary of all those factors here on page number 8, which is basically a summary of what I just spoke about. And then this is your mind map, and the United States Geological Survey produces these maps, and you can see that actually a lot of the community, mostly towards the southern edges, is actually undermined. This is just from old vacant mines that are not being used anymore. They're underneath the properties, which automatically qualifies them to be part of your TIF district. So that's kind of your given that it works out. What was great that we found, well, not great, but so I know that we thought that we might have to bring in certain additional parcels or take parcels out and re-tip them in order to find the qualifying factors. It turned out that we don't need to do that at all. It keeps the process extra simple. We only can bring in the properties that we really want to bring in. It kind of streamlines the rest of the process if you wanted to move forward. Just less paperwork, less ordinances and resolutions you have to pass. Makes things easier to understand. So that was good, because you're only going to bring in properties that you really wanted to. And basically, we have a conclusion recommendation at the end, and this basically says that if you do want to move forward with the amendment of your TIF district, you absolutely can do so. It would be no problem. We just need to go through those processes. So now basically the decision is, do you want to proceed with the amendment of the TIF district to bring in these parcels for potential development in the future?
And that is something that's being planned for the April meeting.
So yeah, basically, this document kind of concludes our current agreement with you guys for the study of the TIF amendment area. So this is kind of like half of what the full process looks like. If you did want to move forward, we have another proposal for you for the actual amendment process. I delivered this to the mayor last month, and we don't need you to make a decision about this now, but if you did want to move forward, we can start in April. You could execute this contract, and even between now and April, we can get started on working on the redevelopment plan. If you did want to move forward, basically we would officially start in April. We need to pass ordinances and certain resolutions that basically say, hey, we're starting this process. We have to notify our taxing districts. You could even pass, inducement resolutions that would say, hey, we intend to add this property to the TIF district, and you can go ahead and start incurring costs related to the development of those properties with the intention of using TIF funds to reimburse those items. That's kind of one of the important things. As you know, you can only use TIF funds within your TIF district, and so if you start developing properties outside your TIF district, there is a special resolution we can pass which allows you to start using monies now, even though we're in the middle of the process. So that kind of will keep the timeline moving forward without letting the amendment of the TIF district hold up any type of development timelines that might be present. So that's kind of it. Were there any questions about what's going on here or anything like that? I know it's kind of breezed through it pretty quick, but I know everyone has my contact information, or should. The mayor, I know, has my personal cell phone number and my email. If you do want to move forward, just let me know. You don't need to tell me tonight, but if you...
Well, we'll take a vote. I mean, there's nothing we can really do.
Sure,
I
right,
mean,
exactly. I know.
Until we do it, so it'll be April 5th would be our next meeting.
Right, and so at that meeting, you could execute the contract, and I could
Yeah.
just have everything ready, which would be the notice that the feasibility study's been performed. You have to put that on file, and then the notice that you're gonna be performing the amendment, and then we kind of start the process from there, and then we can ultimately be done reasonably by, the beginning of July, probably your first meeting in July. You could adopt the ordinances officially establishing the amendment of the TIF district, adopting those properties in there. And then everything goes off to the county and the state, letting them know what's going on. And starting January 1st, the property tax revenues will start to be assessed as being within the TIF district. And so all future revenues from properties assessed in January 1 of next year will start going into your TIF district as soon as those taxes are paid. And that's kind of that. Any questions?
Do you have another one of them books that I could take?
I
can print one.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I sent it the digital copy. I have this one and I already promised it already, sorry.
All right, well, I know Joyce, you wanted to talk just briefly.
Well, I
so
was just gonna ask, just to clarify, you said July, that would be, if everything rolls,
Sure.
that's when it would be,
That's when you would adopt your ordinances officially, establishing the amended TIF district, so that would be,
it would be in place.
It would be formally in place at that point, and then technically the taxes wouldn't start being in effect until January of next year, but it would be in place, which basically that's important because you have an existing TIF district, so as soon as, July came around, you could immediately use TIF funds to fund any type of costs that would come in. So I don't know when debt obligations would become due, but you would be able to immediately pay those with TIF funds, although property taxes wouldn't be collected for those properties until the following.
Till the following year.
Yeah, so it just puts everything in place and establishes the district.
TIF district can purchase properties if they see a just reason to have it.
One of the eligible costs is the acquisition of properties, yes. So if you needed to, let's say that you had a home that nobody was taking care of, it was falling down, and you wanted to buy it and demolish it, you could use TIF funds to do that, as long as within your TIF district. Or if there's property you wanted to buy to develop into a neighborhood, you could use TIF funds to do that. So, yeah, and I believe I sent you an overview of the eligible costs. If there's any particular questions about what costs are and are not eligible, and
Did you
what they
send it
would be to address
recently?
those. Probably last month, but
Oh,
I'd be happy
okay.
to send everything to you again. It would be,
Yeah, and CC Janet and Angel.
okay, yeah, because I'd be happy to provide all that information for you again. We have an overview document of how TIF works, how the mechanism works, and through incremental property tax revenues, as well as what's eligible, what's not eligible, and those general types of FAQ type things.
Is there a deadline to get it filed by, to make sure it's on January of next year?
It's December 31st.
Okay.
So it's an annual
Yeah,
cycle.
this is
Okay.
what I was thinking.
So, basically, there's no benefit doing it now or December 31st.
No, I just didn't know
unless
if
you
there
want
was
to
a
use funds
deadline.
right away. Yeah, so it's just an annual cycle, so the deadline's December.
Okay.
Alrighty. Joyce, you got a minute? John?
The only thing I'm gonna throw out there, Julie and I hired an attorney, a surveyor and an engineer to design the subdivision and plot it all out. So that should be done here hopefully within 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you. We just hope people realize, I know there's several different new faces here. We've lived out there for 36 years, but were tenants until, what, a year ago. And in that 36 years, it's awkward for us with all this, cause if it even wasn't our ground, to see Assumption grow, we've had people every few years since in that 36 years that would call and ask us to sell property. They wanted to build a house out there. It's like, you know, then the school came along and the track, and so, you know, we didn't own it. And we refer them to the landlord, and you know, some of you know the situation there was kinda a different thing. They were from Missouri. Well, eventually, like I said, we've been there, they're like family to us, and timing was right. So, you know, and then as soon as people that have asked us in before, not, you know, knowing we didn't own it, knew we bought it, then the phone calls started again. And so that's, like I said, it's just kinda awkward, but Assumption, I guess, has been landlocked all these years. And there's interest, but it's, I don't know, like I said, that's why we decided, there's so many other people here in town that have gone out on limb, taken risks, you know, 1905 and our little boutiques, and, you know, we're like, well, we just want to see the town continue to grow. There's a lot of good things happening here, and, so like I said, we just thought it was the right time to go ahead and look into it. That way, it scare some of that cost. Thank you.
I've got a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So, can you run by that again? So we can use TIF money to purchase private property or dilapidated commercial property?
Any
for the-
property,
For the intent of tearing it down?
sure.
Do you have to have, like, how do they determine what the rate for purchase is? Can it be whatever the owner, if the owner says, hey, I'll sell it to you for $1, can you buy the property for $1 basically with the intent that you
Yes.
use TIF money to tear it down?
Yeah, you can
Which building
negotiate.
are you talking about, Gary?
There's quite a few, but I can, the old supermarkets, the old stores,
Yeah.
the first one that comes to mind, and there's like 4 or 5 houses in town.
It has to be within the TIF district as it sits, so you can't buy property outside of the TIF
Right,
district.
and you
But
can't modify the TIF district to include those properties with the intent to buy them if you know it ahead of time, right?
Well, if there were certain properties that you decided that you did want to intend to purchase to redevelop or remediate conditions of blight or deterioration, we do have time to amend the boundary area, as long as we don't impact the eligibility of the area, which I don't believe that we would at this point unless something drastic comes about, especially if we're buying, if the properties are in a poor state, that would only enhance the eligibility. So if you wanted to take time to kind of identify where those properties might be and whether or not it would make sense to include them in the amended TIF area, we still have time to do that. We can probably amend it up until we have about the public hearing, which wouldn't happen for another couple months.
June, July, maybe, we are on this track for the public hearing.
If we did, so the city generally has to use prevailing wages for like stuff like that. Does that still apply for TIF, or is TIF different?
So you still need to use prevailing wage for any items that would ordinarily require prevailing wage. However, right now, the position of the Illinois Department of Labor and the legislative bodies say that if you were going to provide TIF monies for a project that ordinarily wouldn't require prevailing wage, TIF itself does not trigger it. So, obviously, if you were gonna do a road or something, you still have to use prevailing wage, even though you don't use TIF funds, but if somebody says, I would like to receive TIF funds to demolish this home on my property, you can provide them with the funding through TIF to take that action without them having to use prevailing wage for that work.
That's interesting, yeah.
So, yeah, TIF itself does not trigger prevailing wage
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah, that's, we had no idea that was even
There is,
possible.
like I said, a couple of
Yeah.
buildings within the downtown.
Sure, so it's, you know, if you're undertaking the work yourself, because ordinarily you have to use prevailing wage, you still have to, but if it's somebody else, you know, a developer or, like, they won't have to use prevailing wage to, you know, perform a private redevelopment project just because you give them TIF funds. So that helps.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome, of course.
Anybody have anything else? Anything? All right, need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
All right, we have a second.
One second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.